Picture a cold November evening in 1960s Britain. The street lamps flicker on outside a terraced house in Manchester, casting long shadows across the cobblestones. Inside, the gas stove hisses to life as Mum pulls out a single tin of corned beef, a bag of potatoes, and whatever vegetables survived the week. There's no popping to Tesco for takeaway. No ready meals. Just ingenuity, rationing era resilience, and the kind of recipes that could stretch a shilling until it screamed. These weren't trendy dishes or Instagram-worthy creations. These were survival meals, born from necessity and served with love. Today, we're counting down 10 iconic British dishes that kept families fed when money was tight and times were hard. If this brings back memories, hit that like button and subscribe to Britain Rewind, because we're about to take you back to the Britain your grandparents knew. Let's begin. Number 10. Bread and dripping. Bread and dripping was the breakfast of working-class Britain. After Sunday's roast, nothing went to waste. The fat from the meat would be collected in a bowl, left to solidify overnight, and by Monday morning, it became a spreadable treasure. You'd slather it thick on doorstop slices of white bread, sprinkle a bit of salt on top, and that was breakfast sorted. It sounds grim now, but back then, it was rich, savory, and deeply satisfying. For kids running off to school in the freezing rain, it was fuel. For families counting every penny, it was resourcefulness. That bowl of dripping sitting in the larder wasn't just fat. It was proof that nothing, absolutely nothing, went to waste in a British household. And speaking of making the most of very little, number 9 took simplicity to another level. Number 9, sugar sandwiches. When the cupboard was truly bare, when even the dripping had run out, there was always bread, butter, and sugar. Sugar sandwiches were the last line of defense against hunger. 2 slices of cheap white bread, a thin scrape of margarine, and a generous sprinkle of white sugar in between. Close it up, press it down, and hand it to a child who didn't know any better. It wasn't nutrition. It wasn't a balanced meal. It was survival dressed up as a treat. Kids would eat them after school, sitting on the front step, licking the sweetness off their fingers. Parents would make them without shame because shame didn't fill bellies. It was a quiet admission that times were hard, but it was also a reminder that British families always found a way. And when there was a little more to work with, they turned to number 8. Number 8, corned beef hash. Open a tin of corned beef, peel a few potatoes, chop an onion if you had one, and you had the makings of corned beef hash. This was the weeknight savior for families across Britain. You dice the potatoes, fry them up in a pan with a knob of lard, crumble in the corned beef, and let it all crisp together into a golden, salty mass. Serve it with a bit of brown sauce or a fried egg on top if you were feeling flush. It was cheap, it was filling, and it could feed 4 people from 1 tin and a handful of spuds. Corned beef hash didn't pretend to be fancy. It was honest food for honest people, cooked on gas stoves in council kitchens while the telly hummed in the background. But if you wanted something even more resourceful, number 7 was waiting. Number 7, leftover bubble and squeak. Monday mornings in Britain smelled like bubble and squeak. After Sunday dinner, every scrap of leftover veg, mashed potato, cabbage, carrots, sprouts, would be scraped into a bowl and saved. The next day, Mum would fry it all up in a pan with a bit of butter or lard, pressing it down so it turned crispy and golden. The name came from the sound it made in the pan, bubbling, squeaking, sizzling. It was never the same twice because it depended entirely on what you had left. Sometimes it was mostly cabbage. Sometimes it was heavy on the spuds. But it was always warm, always filling, and always free. Bubble and squeak was the ultimate zero-waste meal long before that phrase ever existed. And just when you thought leftovers couldn't get more creative, number 6 arrived. Number 6, liver and onions. Liver was cheap because most people didn't want it. But for families stretching every penny, liver and onions became a weeknight staple. You'd slice the liver thin, dredge it in a bit of flour, and fry it quickly in a hot pan with sliced onions until everything was soft and savory. Serve it with mashed potatoes and gravy made from Bisto granules, and you had a meal that felt almost proper. It wasn't glamorous. The texture put some kids off, but it was protein, it was affordable, and it filled you up. In the terraced houses and prefabs of post-war Britain, liver and onions represented pragmatism over preference. You ate what you could afford, and you were grateful for it. Now, if this is bringing back memories, drop a comment below and tell us what your mum used to make when money was tight. And if you're enjoying this trip back in time, don't forget to subscribe to Britain Rewind. We're keeping these memories alive, one video at a time. Right, let's crack on with number 5. Number 5, Spam Fritters. Spam fritters were the chippy tea of working-class Britain. A tin of spam cost next to nothing, and when you sliced it thick, dipped it in batter, and fried it golden, it became something almost indulgent. Serve it alongside chips and mushy peas, and you had a meal that felt like a treat even though it cost pennies. Spam fritters were everywhere in the 1970s, from school canteens to corner chippies to kitchen tables across the country. The meat was salty, the batter was crispy, and the whole thing was unapologetically working class. It wasn't trying to be gourmet. It was trying to feed families who couldn't afford steak. And in that, it succeeded brilliantly. But when even spam felt like a stretch, families turned to number 4. Number 4, Jam roly-poly. Jam roly-poly was pudding born from poverty. A bit of suet pastry, rolled flat, spread with cheap jam, usually strawberry or raspberry, then rolled up and steamed in a cloth until it was soft and sweet. Slice it thick, serve it with a splash of custard, and suddenly the hardest day felt a little bit softer. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't even particularly special, but it was warm, it was sweet, and it brought comfort to families who had very little to smile about. In drafty kitchens across Britain, jam roly-poly bubbled away on the stove while kids did their homework at the table and dad came home from the factory. It was a small luxury in a life that didn't have many. And speaking of stretching ingredients to their absolute limit, number 3 was a masterclass. Number 3, Scouse. Scouse was Liverpool's gift to struggling Britain. A one-pot stew made from the cheapest cuts of meat, or sometimes no meat at all, potatoes, carrots, onions, and whatever else you could find, all simmer together for hours until everything melted into something hearty and filling. You'd serve it with bread for dipping, and it would feed a family for days. The name came from lobscouse, a sailor's stew, but by the mid-20th century, it belonged to the terraces and tenements of Merseyside. Scouse wasn't just food. It was identity. It was community. It was proof that even when you had nothing, you could still make something worth gathering around. And as we move closer to number 1, the meals get even more stripped back. Number 2 is up next. Number 2, bread and butter pudding. When the bread went stale, you didn't throw it away. You made bread and butter pudding. Slices of old bread, buttered and layered in a dish, sprinkled with a handful of raisins if you were lucky, then covered in a mixture of milk, eggs, and a bit of sugar before being baked until golden. It was the definition of making do. Every ingredient was a leftover or a staple so cheap it barely counted. But when it came out of the oven, warm and custardy, it felt like love. Bread and butter pudding was served in school canteens, church halls, and family kitchens across the country. It was humble, yes, but it was also proof that British cooks could turn nothing into something worth remembering. And now, we've reached number 1. Number 1, cheese and potato pie. Cheese and potato pie was the ultimate survival meal. Sliced potatoes, layered in a dish with grated cheese, a splash of milk, maybe a bit of onion if you had it, then baked until the top went crispy and golden. No meat, no frills. Just potatoes and cheese doing all the heavy lifting. It was warm, it was filling, and it could stretch to feed 6 people if you sliced it thin enough. Families ate it on winter evenings when the heating barely worked and money had run out before payday. It wasn't aspirational. It wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was just there, reliably, when nothing else was. Cheese and potato pie is number one because it represents everything these meals were: simple, resourceful, and deeply, undeniably British. These meals weren't cooked for Instagram. They weren't part of some foodie trend or nostalgic marketing campaign. They were survival, pure and simple, served on chip plates in cold kitchens by parents who were doing their absolute best. Britain in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s was a place where nothing went to waste, where ingenuity mattered more than money, and where a tin of corned beef and a bag of spuds could become dinner for a family of 5. These dishes remind us where we came from. They remind us of the resilience, the resourcefulness, and the quiet dignity of working-class Britain. If this brought back memories, share it with someone who'll understand. Hit that like button, subscribe to Britain Rewind, and let's keep these stories alive. Because this is our history. This is Britain Rewind.